Hello and welcome. It's Alexa Linton here, your host for the Whole Horse Podcast. We're here to look at all the ways that the horse industry is changing before our very eyes in very cool, very amazing ways. And we're chatting with the people at the forefront of that change, the professionals, the trainers, the body workers, the researchers that are helping our lives with horses become better and better. Thanks for being here. I love that you're here and listening and learning. And if you ever have a guest that you want to suggest or a topic that you want to hear, just let me know and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. It means a lot. And I look forward to seeing you for season 4. Hi, everyone. It's Alexa Linton here, and you're here on the Whole Horse Podcast. We're beginning season 4 of the podcast, and we're here for episode 67. And I have back one of my absolute favorite guests. Here with me today is Elsa Sinclair. Thanks for being here, Elsa.
Oh, thank you, Alexa. I am so pleased to get a chance to chat with you today.
We've already been chatting before the podcast, and Elsa was just dropping these, golden nuggets all over the place. And I was like, we need to start. Please remember what you were saying. So, yeah, I mean, it's just always such a pleasure, Elsa. I feel like every time I get to talk to you, I learn something, even though, as we'd shared, me and Elsa are actually, as the crow flies, fairly close to each other. We share similar weather systems, and we're here on the West Coast. But because we're across the border, US and Canada, right now, we are literally not able to have a visit or anything at this moment. So this is a wonderful other way of connecting, Elsa, and I'm sure that my listeners feel the same at this moment when a lot of us are at home right now and kind of settling into this really different rhythm at the moment. And I think it fits with our conversation topics today so well around like this what a lot of us are navigating in the times of COVID, which is around slowing everything down. So I know that was something you wanted to talk about today, and I would love to get into it because as a person who has a tricky time with slowing down and with patience and any of those things. um I feel like I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this, and that a lot of us are being called to this slowing down by our horses right now.
Yeah, I think so. And
Hmm.
I think that it's really beautiful that we have this sort of digital connection, that we can still connect to the world while we are being home. So we can reach out and connect to the world and then take all that information that we're able to gather digitally and bring it into focus at home in this sort of beautiful slowing down process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell me about what's going on for you right now. I know that you'd shared about your current project, Taming Wild Evolution, and how that has really shifted before your very eyes. You know, in terms of this slowing down piece, what is going on for you at this moment?
So I really was very cocky and self-assured when I started this project with the stallions. My plan was to film a recreation of the first movie, but instead of a mare and a foal, I was going to have 2 adult stallions that came from different backgrounds. So we could compare and contrast how they responded to freedom-based training. And I really thought it was going to go very similarly to everything else I've done. And I got humbled. I'll just be really honest. um, Freedom-based training is like the slowest way to train a horse in the whole world. And I always laugh about that. And my students will argue with me. They'll say, no, it's amazing. It's quick. The changes you see in the horses are so beautiful. And yes, that is true. But getting to the point where you can suggest, I would like to go for a ride, and the horse says, yes, I would love to carry you for a ride. Where would you like to
Mm-hmm.
go? That is a very slow evolution, hence the title of the movie. But when I started with these two stallions, I really had no appreciation for how slow it was going to go. So I set a 1 year timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the stallions, Atlas, who came from an abusive background, he really didn't even want to be touched in the first year. And I really wanted to explore more of the relationship in the film than just standing in his paddock, not being able to touch him. So this 1 year movie plan turned into maybe a 2 or 3 year movie plan, just because it's really important to me to have horses volunteer what
Mm-hmm.
they would like to do with me as a partner. And this particular horse that came from an abusive background just wasn't volunteering. He wasn't interested in all of the things I suggested. And what that really forced me to do is look closer at how I was suggesting things and what my body movements meant and why he was so much more sensitive than any other horse I've ever worked with. And the thing about slowing down is I feel like a lot of us are big picture people. We like the big view. We like to see where we're going. We like to look at the whole forest. And what slowing down really allows you to do, there's that saying, slow down and smell the roses. And it allows you to focus in on the finer details around you if you're not going so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And where I thought I was really pretty aware of all these details in a conversation with horses, in a relationship with horses, Atlas has put some pressure on me to say, no, no, look closer. Let's bring the microscope down even more into minute detail. What does the twitch of that finger mean? What does it mean when the ear turns an eighth of an inch? What does it mean? What are the tiny things that maybe didn't seem important before, but are vitally important now?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what they mean? And do you know how to respond to them? And do you know how to respond to them in a way that's not overwhelming for this particular relationship? And I've been really awesomely challenged.
Ooh. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. As someone who has a hard time, even when I'm out in the woods, like looking at the minute details, like where are we going,
Yes.
or like, yeah, just trying to stay out of my head, or yeah, I can only imagine that sense of like how much presence is required
Yeah.
to see those, and be body aware enough to be like, what is my body doing in these moments?
Yeah. When you
Hmm.
walk in the woods with somebody who's really detail oriented, they'll say, look at that snail that you almost stepped on. Did you notice where your foot was in relationship to that
Yep.
snail? Look at the beautiful tiny red flowers on the lichen on that tree that you just brushed your hand across. Did you notice them as your hand brushed across them? You are in relationship to these multitude of amazing things that when we have a really big picture view, we miss them all because we're
Hmm.
thinking about where we're going.
Yeah. And where we're going after that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, I love this metaphor that you're creating here, because I know that there's been times where, especially when I've been engaged in a meditation or something, where I've looked at a rock really close and been like, wow,
Yeah.
there's these patterns, there's these colors, like shapes, in within this one rock, that are so beautiful, and that I would never have realized before.
Yeah.
And I yeah, with this process, what are you noticing as you kind of bring your engagement, your presence, to the more, shall we say, microscopic, or to the smaller things?
So what it is it's a practice of noticing links between one thing and the next thing. And so
Mm.
I'll give you an example. When Atlas's ears get very, very still, okay, and he's in this sort of frozen
Mhm.
state,
Mhm.
it could tip either way. It could tip towards fight or flight,
Yep.
or it could tip towards thinking. And my job is to notice the minute differences in the type of freeze and be aware of the trend. Is this trending towards fight or flight? Or is this trending towards thinking and feeling better? And when I see those trends, I want to ask myself, why? Sometimes it's just a gut instinct. I think this is getting better. But then if I'm going to teach this, I have to be able to explain why. Why do I think it's going to get better? We all have that instinct, and that's beautiful and that's wonderful. But then when you go to teach a process, you have to start putting a little bit more logic behind it. And so that's where I'm at. Also, if you want to recreate a process on days when maybe your intuition is not quite as tuned in and turned on as it is on other days,
Mhm.
having some logic behind it will really help you through those days that are maybe not as easy as other days.
Mm.
So, the minute difference in how the nostril flares, or how steady the breathing is, or how deep the breathing is, or how often the blinks happen, or whether the head is high or low, or the muscle tension is tight or less tight.
Mm.
It's really easy for us to say one is bad and the other is good. It's a little bit more detail oriented to say this is getting better or this is getting worse.
Mm.
If you don't put a label on it of good or bad to begin with, but instead look for the links and the trends, you're much more able to know whether you should wait and just be present because it's getting better. If things are getting better, the horse is feeling better, they're going to become more cooperative, they're going to
Mhm.
want to do more things, there's more yield, more play, more engagement. If you don't do anything but match them in that moment, they are free to express themselves in really good ways.
Mm.
But if it's trending towards worse and you sit there and you do nothing but match them, you come across as kind of a useless friend.
Right.
So being able to tell the difference and read those details soon enough that you know whether it's more appropriate to take some action or it's more appropriate to just wait and see what unfolds, that is the art and the science behind what I do.
Mm.
And,
Wow.
I always say, if you're not sure, just wait, it'll become more clear. And if things explode in your face, you go, okay, well, what happened leading up to that explosion so that I can see the links and the patterns so that next time I can take some action before it blows up in my face.
Mm.
And there's no harm in making a big mistake like that. Hopefully, we don't do it repeatedly, but that is how we learn. We go, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, just wait and see. It'll become more obvious. And if it gets better, you go, great, let me remember what links led up to things getting better with this horse.
Mhm.
That's when I stay out of the way and just let it unfold. Or look at the links that led up to it getting worse and go, okay, well, how far back did I know that was going to happen? How far back did I get an inkling of, oh, look at that ear, look at how it's not moving, or look at that eye get really stuck and frozen? I think that's going to get worse. If you're not sure, you wait and you see. And then you gather evidence and you're going to know better next time.
Hmm. So it's a bit of a research project in some ways as
Exactly.
well. Hmm.
So
And
most
yeah.
horses, they are communicators. Because my stallion Atlas was very much abused, he is not a communicator. He's a real shut down, deep freeze kind of horse. And that means that you have to learn to read the freeze, the lack of communication, instead of the actual communication, which has been mind bogglingly interesting for me. And interesting in that I can't keep him with the other horses full time because they can't read him either.
Wow.
And what happens is he gets a little stuck and they start poking at him to interact. And he takes it and he takes it and he takes it and he takes it and he gets more and more and more stuck. And then he explodes and he hurts somebody.
Mm.
And the other horses don't see it coming. They don't read him any better than I read him. And so what's really interesting is I have him in with all the other horses for as much of the day as I can, but I am present and I am there to read him for the other horses. So that if they start into a worse trend, a downward spiral, I can interrupt it and say, hey, why don't we take a little walk and just let Alice take a breather? And then we'll come back and talk to him a little later. And I found I can read him really well. And for the most part, everybody gets along great as long as I'm there to intervene before he explodes.
Mm. Wow. That's, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how much you've been learning about trauma through all of this as well.
I read so much about human trauma because I
I
find
bet
that
you do.
there's not a whole lot written about it
No.
in the animal world. And a lot of it correlates. Yeah, our brains are a little bit different, but you can, with a little bit of a stretch of your brain, you can correlate it between what humans
Mhm.
go through and what horses go through.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I have the Body Keeps the Score on my night table right now, and that's been very, very helpful for, understanding a lot of, my clients and things. But it
Yeah.
sounds like Atlas, it's a next level for him.
The amazing thing about him is at his core, I don't know if you ever read the children's book Ferdinand the Bull.
I feel like I did. Yes. That.
Ferdinand is supposed to be a fighting bull and he just doesn't want to fight.
Yeah.
And it's this beautiful children's story. And I feel like that is Atlas in a nutshell. He is the sweetest, kindest, most gentle horse I've ever met.
Mm.
Unfortunately, his career was as a bucking bronco in the rodeo. And I think in order to get him to do his job, they had to abuse him really heavily. Now, he's physically one of the most amazing specimens I've ever watched. His speed and his agility and his violence is out of this world. But you have to push him really hard to access it.
Mm.
So I think he was very good at his job, but he didn't want to do his job, which led to a lot of trauma.
A lot of trauma. Yeah. Absolutely. And how that shows up in the body and the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long was he there for?
Well, I got him as an 8-year-old stallion.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure when they start, but it looks like he was bred for bucking.
Yeah.
So they take the best bucking horses and then they breed them back to draft horses to make them stronger or thoroughbreds to make them
Yeah.
faster. And I think he's first generation draft cross because he's pretty big.
Yeah.
And so, he was bred to be a bucking horse and he did it until he started attacking people. And that was what I was told when I bought him from the kill buyer,
Yeah.
is that he was absolutely crazy and he didn't think I should buy him. And I said, perfect.
That's exactly the horse I'm looking for. Oh my goodness. And tell me, when you did bring him home, because I think you've told me a little bit about his story bringing him home, but I'm imagining he was aggressive
He was
towards you.
no, he
No?
was not. As I
Amazing.
said, it takes a lot to
To
turn him
push him.
aggressive.
Yeah.
And I put him in a situation where I was never going to corner him and I
Yeah.
was never going to get close to him unless he made it clear that was okay with him.
Amazing.
Um, Now, he was really sick when I brought him home, too. He was
Okay.
just pouring gallons of yellow snot out of his nose. And my whole inside of my horse trailer looked like it had been
Oh,
slimed by some sort of an alien by the time I
oh
got
my
home.
gosh.
And I couldn't touch him and I couldn't have a vet treat him, obviously. So we just
No.
brought him home and gave him good food and water and hoped for the best. And it cleared up. But I think he was pretty low. He also had been in a stallion fight at the kill pens.
Yeah.
So he had one eye swollen shut and he was all covered with, scrapes and bruises. And
Oh.
so, we started from that very intense
Oof.
sort of beaten down place, and then went into a lot of freeze. I've never seen a horse stand still without moving, looking like a stone statue in the paddock for as many hours as he can.
Oh my goodness.
So he
Yeah.
would go from eating to freezing and back to eating again and back to freezing. And he didn't move.
Whew. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I look back and I laugh at how confident I was. I really thought, a couple of months, we'll work through this. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
with the things I know now, I don't think it would have taken me so long, but I really had to get a lot of things wrong
Yeah.
before I figured out how to get them right.
Yeah. Yeah. And what have you noticed? I mean, I think there's this curiosity in me because, of course, human and, outcome or like, where are we, what are the changes that we've noticed, right? Like I think as a human, I find that it's hard to let go of like, okay, we're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Have you noticed progression with him? Have you noticed shift in the work that you've been doing?
Oh, absolutely. Um, the biggest thing that comes to mind, and this is true, I think, for every confident horse trainer out there, every confident person, is that if you can get an inch, don't ask for a mile.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, I fell into this trap the other day.
Yep. And
Oh,
I look back and I just have to laugh at myself for how many times we would start to make progress and I go,
mhm.
good, now we can really do some things. And then I would ask too much and then it would all
Yep.
backslide. And then
Oh, so human. It's
so,
so
yep.
freaking human of us to do that. Yeah, I had an instructor call me out on that last week. I was like, I would, ask for one little thing and then I'd be like, "Oh, and this."
Yeah,
You know? And she'd be like, "Do you
exactly.
realize you're doing that?" I was like, "What?" She's like, "You're asking for this thing and she's stretching to give it to you, and then you're asking for this way bigger other thing
Yeah,
before you actually release and reward." And,
yeah.
I was like, "Huh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very human. Wow." And so what happened when you kind of started to let some of that go?
Well, I think um, sometimes students will say, freedom-based training, you have to be so patient. And they'll say, I was doing the exercises and I was breathing and then I got something wrong and my horse bit me and my first feeling was relief. Thank God something interesting happened. And we really have to learn how to be interested in the minute details so that we don't push for something big and obvious. And that
Ah,
was really the learning for me, is you take this sort of big picture that we have and you bring it down and you bring out the microscope and you go, what is interesting about this moment? What are the tiny details that are fascinating? Can I predict the next tiny detail that's going to happen? Do I know how soon he's going to blink? Can I guess how soon those ears are going to change? Can I anticipate the next tiny detail? And then it becomes interesting. Because if we don't become interested in the tiny details, what happens is we get bored. And when we get
oh
bored,
yeah.
we start pushing for that mile because we want something interesting to happen.
We want something fabulous.
And yes, we would rather it be something fabulous and positive. But what happens in our brain is if we
Uh-huh.
can't get fabulous and positive, then we'll go for just downright interesting, even if it's awful.
Yeah, absolutely. What a lesson that is about being, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
a human. And I love that sense of sort of rewriting what we're actually engaged with. I know, and you may have read like Tom Brown Jr., like Stalking Wolf books, like all the um, learning to track and to be like one with the woods, see tiny, tiny tracks
Yeah.
in the dirt, of little, like, and knowing what bird it is and things. And that sense of that is fascinating.
Right.
That is fascinating. But I would love to know, how does one train one's mind, especially in the world that we live in, where it's a mile a minute. There's always some sort of something interesting to catch our attention somewhere else.
Yeah.
How
So I
how did
think
you work with that? Yeah.
awareness is like a muscle.
Yeah.
So if you work it enough just so that it's a little bit tired, it will get stronger and it will grow.
Hmm.
If you try and work your awareness so much that it is exhausted, then it hurts. Like it hurts to use it. If you use it so much that it's really exhausted, you'll end up injuring yourself to some extent. And then you can't pay attention anymore. And this was really helpful for me. So, not that I got this on the first day. This has been an evolution. But what I learned to do is spend time with Atlas, really pay attention, but then notice when I was getting tired and ask myself, is this getting better or is this getting worse? Is my ability to see these tiny details continuing to grow, continuing to, intrigue me, interest me, fascinated me? Or am I getting tired and I'm struggling to notice things? And if I'm getting tired, I've been there too long. Okay, I've done too much
Yep.
already.
Yeah.
And so the idea is to stretch that muscle of awareness to the point that it can stretch on that day or in that moment. And then there's a really beautiful exercise that I heard an old time trainer talk about, which is, fixing fences, even if your fences don't need fixing.
Yep.
Walk around checking all the fences in your paddock, check all the boards, check all the connections, and just keep your horse in your peripheral vision and just keep working around the space. Now, what I ended up doing that is I bridged that into raking the gravel,
Hmm.
picking up the manure, trimming the dead branches off the trees. Whatever it was in the paddock, it was my way to rest my awareness and bring my focus back out to the bigger picture. I can't deal with the minute details anymore. My awareness is tired. So it's time for me to widen my view, look at the big picture, work around the space, and then in my peripheral vision, notice if there's something that starts to pique my interest again. Something that tells me, oh, what is Atlas doing now? And that tells me that awareness muscle has had a little bit of a break and it's ready to work again. And I'll do another set. Can I pay attention? Do I know where to be, when to move, when to be still? Are those minute details something that I'm really interested in? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Can I go do something else, widen my focus out before I'm exhausted?
Mm. Like a workout program.
It is. It is a workout program for your thinking and your emotional state.
Wow.
It's really all about that emotional intelligence that people talk about. And emotional intelligence is being able to read your partners and interact with them in a way that works for you and them. But that emotional intelligence is a workout for your awareness, and you can only do as much as you can do.
Hmm.
So believe me, I had to get that one wrong a lot before I figured out the feel and the timing that was necessary there.
And I can imagine that, yeah, like you probably came in with a few, almost headaches and things of being like, oh my gosh, it was, too much detail, too much paying attention.
Yeah. And what would happen is, I'd get a little tired. I would stop noticing the important details.
Hmm.
And then I would do something like I'd go to adjust my sunglasses, and Atlas would get so afraid he would just about fall flat on his face trying to bolt away from me too fast. And I would think, all I did was move my sunglasses. But it wasn't that. It was all of the tiny little details that led up to me moving my sunglasses that meant he was going to be completely overwhelmed by a hand being raised from waist level to head level.
Whew.
And, the consequences were so massive for me missing a few details. I really had to start honoring what I could and couldn't do, and be forgiving of myself. Listen, my awareness is exhausted. I can't be the right person in the right place at the right time for you right now. So I'm going to go fix some fences or rake the paddock, give my awareness a little break, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
come back when I'm a little fresher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And through that awareness, what are the some of the shifts that you notice in Atlas? Does it create I've had this like concept rolling in my mind lately of like, what if our training could actually heal trauma? What if what we did with our horses um on that level, as a body worker and a someone who practices the healing arts in various ways, like it always healing's always sort of top of mind for me. What makes those shifts that actually create
Yeah.
a steadier, healthier system? So, yeah, what sort of changes have you been noticing that you might deem a healing
Well,
process?
I have a theory, and this is an
Yeah.
unproven theory, but it's a working theory,
Yeah, yeah.
that trauma is healed. Like, I can't heal his trauma, he has to heal his own
Yep.
trauma. And the way he does that is by helping others. And we had one of the most, I have a Patreon group where I post videos every week of, the progress with my two stallions and whatever else I'm doing that week. And this summer I filmed one that was just amazing. And I had the two stallions in together. And Ari, my Mustang stallion, was having a terrible week, which is unusual for him. He's a very even keel horse. He doesn't usually have bad weeks. But I had just turned him out on the lushest green pasture I think he'd ever seen in his life. And the sugar overload on his
Yep.
body just tipped his emotions off the chart, which meant when the flies landed on him, he just kind of lost his cool. And he was really irritated and upset. And I had the two stallions in together. And every time Ari would get really upset, he would go to pick a fight with Atlas, the other stallion. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is like, I got a lot of work to do here. But what was interesting is Atlas was able to rise to the occasion. And every time Ari came over to pick a fight, he was able to change his focus off the grass, fully engage, comfort Ari, interact with him, and then suggest they go back to eating. And every time it worked. And watching him help Ari out of a bad day was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And
Wow.
I never once had to intervene. And I think those kind of moments is where trauma is healed.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a
Mm-hmm.
working theory. We'll see how that goes as this evolution progresses. But I see it also, when I'm having an off day within a range that Atlas can handle, and he can say, "Don't worry, I've got your back. Your timing's a little off. You're missing a couple of things, but I can take a deep breath and help you out instead of overreacting to you." And in those moments where he can take a deep breath and fill in for me a little bit, that's where I think the most healing happens.
Mm. Yeah. I often think of healing as a returning to oneself
Mhm.
and one's true nature.
Yes.
That's the real process. And yes, that it can't there's no external there's nothing external that can really make that happen. It is an internal process that happens. So it sounds like Atlas is finding, more and more glimpses of that true nature,
Yeah.
which is this gentle soul that he is.
Yeah. It's
Mm.
it's really, really beautiful. Just yesterday I have my three geldings and my two stallions, and I had them all together in a fairly small space because it's where the grass is the best. And it was really interesting. Ari came over and he wanted to have a little bit of a game with Atlas, and Atlas wasn't up for it. And it was really interesting watching him take a deep breath and turn and with beautiful rhythm just like walk to another place in the space and be like, "I'm not really up for it today." But he didn't need help. And Ari was able to take that and go, "Yeah, no problem. I'll just graze with you instead." And, that wouldn't have happened even a couple of months ago. So that coming back to himself, knowing what he's okay with, knowing what he's not okay with, but then being able to communicate it, whether it's to me or the other horses, that's the healing of trauma, I think.
I think so too. I think so too. I think that when we look at all of this, one of the biggest pieces around that healing is the feeling of being understood and seen.
Yeah.
I think, if any human kind of sits with that and thinks, what am I really looking for when, I'm doing X, Y, and Z? you know,
Uh,
generally it comes back to those pieces, right?
yeah.
Is the desire, to be seen as fully and truly as possible and understood,
Yeah.
and
But then I think more than that, it's being seen and understood as a growing being. So I
yes.
want you to see and understand me today, but I also want you to see and understand me tomorrow, and the fact that I'm going to be bigger or different or somehow
Hmm.
have evolved. And I want you to know that too.
Mm.
And I think that's really an interesting place. As human beings, we tend to either go, too small or too big, where I see you, you're exactly the same as you were yesterday, which is not true. Or I want you to be different than you are, which doesn't really work either. There's sort of a middle road there.
Mm. Yeah, and you see this in horses a lot, right? Where someone has this real sense of, this horse is like this.
Yeah.
They'll kind of, you'll tell you, well, this horse doesn't, da 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 da. You're like, ooh, big rule book for this one, and yeah, a real sense of that horse then is shackled by those understandings, or those that way of thinking about them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, as it seemed like with Atlas, even going to the kill pens and you know, the person there being like, you don't want to take this horse, right? He'd earned himself a bit of a rep, right? But
Yeah.
there was a box that he existed in.
Yeah. And
Mm,
there's just so much room for us to become, anything we want to be. But as you said, being heard and understood is really the key, I think, to most of us social creatures.
mm,
Is, we can be anything we want to be, but at the core, we want to be something that can be heard and understood. And for Atlas, he was not heard or understood until he started attacking people. That was the only way he figured out to be heard and understood.
yep.
And that's what works, that's what he'll do. And so it's been this incredibly slow, beautiful process for me to show him that I hear him and I understand him in the most tiny, minute details, and he doesn't have to yell to be heard.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's fun stuff.
It is fun stuff, and I think I think I mean, I'm so amazed by the work that you're doing. I really am. Definite fangirl over here. And and I think, a part of it is, I see in you pieces that I'm like, oh my gosh, I really want to bring forward that part of me. And I think for so many of us, um, the ability to, number one, have patience, like unending. Um, and maybe this is something we can speak to today, because I know one of my greatest shames as a horsewoman, like that I don't even like speaking about, that makes me kind of cringe even talking about it here, being like, oh my God, people are going to know, is that I have a temper. I have a really fast temper, and it happens when I am harmed.
Yeah.
It flares when, someone steps on my foot, or, something happens where I am hurt. And it's like this, like this thing that occurs in me,
Yep.
and I think probably from my own trauma, but it is like, I don't always have enough time to wrangle myself,
Yeah.
before but yeah, before the demons emerge, right?
It's
And it's
exactly what we were just talking about with Alice,
yeah,
though. It's that
yeah,
you weren't heard or understood by
no,
your horse, therefore they stepped on your foot. And you feel like the only way you're going to be heard and understood is if you show that temper.
yeah, yep, which doesn't really work at all, and Diva will be like, "Oh my god, it's here. The demons have come," like and just that and seeing those, her eyes just go, "Oh crap," it's and that is so heartbreaking to see that in her, right?
Yeah.
And going, okay, I acknowledge this part of myself, this little girl, this little part of me that for whatever reason feels like this is the place I need to go, to feel understood. Um yeah, would you have any advice for that part of, I think, many
It's
of
it's
us?
so common for many of us.
Yeah,
And it really comes down to acknowledging how many things you missed before that happened.
yeah,
In a relationship, it is always that it takes two to tango.
yep,
And as much as we want to think that we have control of our partner's steps, we really have a lot more control of our own steps in
mm-hmm,
this tango. And so there's a lot of things that happen before the point that somebody feels like they need to fight to be heard, whether it's the
mm,
human or the horse.
mm.
And then, unfortunately, there's a huge amount of shame that goes into it when we realize how far we let it go before we did
Yeah,
something more positive. And shame is not useful. The more ashamed we are, the more it tends to kind of feed on itself. Um, so, it's good to acknowledge that I'm really ashamed I let it get to this point. But now, what can I learn from this? How far back could I go and realize the trend was heading this direction?
oh
At
yeah.
what point could I have changed the trend before we actually got here? And
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and I'm looking back on those experiences, and it's like, the one time it's like, oh, I decided that it was a good idea to, tie Diva to the barn wall where she feels completely uncomfortable, never is there ever. She's pooped like 3 times, she's obviously stressed. And I'm like, we need to trim your feet. This is happening. And then she spooks at something, turns around, steps on me,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because she is already so activated by
yeah,
what is happening. She doesn't know where her feet are,
yeah.
nor does she particularly care. She's wanting, there's other things. She is tied with her face to the barn wall, and she cannot see what is going on around her,
Yeah.
you know. And yeah, I look at those sort of scenarios and I go,
But the
you're
problem
right.
is, when you look at all the scenarios, the first thing that comes up is the emotion of shame. I'm so
Yeah.
ashamed I let it
I
get that far.
yeah, it is.
And while that is good to acknowledge, it's really important to realize that shame is not actually
No.
useful.
No. No. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
taking care of my daughter's thoroughbred right now before she ships to Florida to join my daughter. And she's a hot, hot, hot thoroughbred. And, I've been doing my very best to give her the best of myself. And I was tired the other day and I didn't take her out of the paddock. And she's a horse that depends on that exercise to
Yep.
feel sane. And the next day, I happened to be in a real big hurry when I was changing her blanket and I got kicked at.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, yeah, there were a lot of things that led up to that. I could be mad at her for kicking at me,
Uh-huh.
or I could say, you know what? I could do a better job of setting you up for success here because you
Mm.
didn't actually kick me, you kicked at me. And, it's just a wake up call to say, hey, you are not listening for what I need. And
Mm.
this relationship is not just the human needs, it's the horse needs too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting thing. A lot of people will ask me, they'll say, well, don't you have to let a horse bite you and then correct them before they know they shouldn't bite people? And that's a really loaded question.
Whew, yeah.
But what I find it stems into is in traditional dominant training. We teach horses that freeze is the only reasonable expression of stress. So when a horse is stressed, they will either freeze, fight, or flight.
Yep.
And in dominant training, we say if you are stressed, freeze is the only reasonable option. And to an extent, that's where that statement is true. You have to let the horse bite you and then reprimand them so they know that they shouldn't bite people. I don't really like that kind of training.
Mm-mm.
I would much rather educate a horse when you are feeling stressed. Here are the ways you can self soothe so that you don't want to bite someone. And to me, that's much more valuable education than if you're stressed, just shut up about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
So, what I found is when horses get stressed, they will either self soothe and try and make things better, or they will self agitate and make them more on edge so that they are toned and ready to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what we have to do is we've got to teach them that is worth building a pattern of self soothing when stress starts to go up, and that self agitation just isn't needed.
Yes.
So that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
There are trainers out there that say I'm not really a horse trainer because I'm not teaching horses to not bite you. Um, but I just see myself as a different kind of horse trainer. I'm
Mm-hmm.
teaching horses to not want to bite anybody, which is a little different.
I like it. I like it. And I mean, it's interesting as a body worker, and I know I have uh, quite a few equine body workers that are listeners,
Mhm.
because I think it's a little bit of an overlooked part of our training is the reading of horses.
Yeah.
And it's so wild to me that that is not a built-in, that this kind of subtlety is not a built-in.
Well, that's my goal is to help more and more people be
Yeah.
able to read a horse. Most of the people who study with me don't do freedom based training as an entirety of their work, but they do it as a way to really hone their skill to
Yeah.
read a horse.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do I see they're getting agitated or getting stressed before they have to yell it at anybody? And
Mm,
when I see it, can I help them turn the tide
yeah.
and make that a habitual pattern of turning the tide when stress starts to get a little too high?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I would love to. I mean, it's such an interesting thing for me when I work, on horses. For example, yesterday I was working on a little mare, and she's very, we often hear this term stoic,
Yeah.
but I think she freezes a lot.
Hmm.
And she had an incredible amount of pain in her body. And I really wanted to give her some release to that pain,
Hmm.
through some trigger points and things. But she was very expressive that as soon as it was at the hamstring group, as soon as I got on there, even at the tail head, she would pick up a leg to kick. And I thought, this is a mare that's an angel. Like, she is still being ridden. She is
Yeah.
still being so good. And she doesn't kick at me. She kicks backwards. And and so there was this part of me that was watching and going, okay, is it going to be constructive for her or helpful for her to keep my hand there, and allow some, because her muscle was so over facilitated there, we could feel it
Hmm.
jumping under my fingers. Or
Mm.
is that actually going to cause more concerns for her in the future by staying, in that space? And I think that's something that as body workers we're constantly kind of met with, right? Is do I push through,
Oh, yeah.
and sort of go with, okay, there might be some fight, or different things happening, but then there's some release at the end, or do I let it go somewhere else, do something different, step back? What would be your sense of that with a mare like that, who, you know she obviously needed release in that area, but is that the way to assist with what she's needing?
So, I run into this a lot. And Ultimately, I think it comes down to confidence.
Yeah.
So if you put your hand on that spot and you feel the muscle jumping and you
Yeah.
feel inside yourself, you are absolutely sure it's going to be hard for a moment and then it's going to get
Yeah.
better,
Yeah.
you hang in there with it.
Okay.
But then you really have to watch for that false confidence where you go, oh, yeah, I got this. And you
Yeah.
don't feel it.
Yeah.
Um, about 6 months ago, I decided Atlas was ready to wear a halter. He's a stallion. You know, I'm afraid if he gets loose and goes to my neighbor's breeding farm that nobody's going to be able to catch him and bring him home again. So I was like, it's high time he learned to wear a halter. And he ended up with muscle spasms every time I brought the rope near him. So his neck would spasm
Wow.
and it was uncontrollable and it made him angry. And I had the really stupid idea that we were just going to push through that. And so I kept working him, and the muscle spasms got worse and worse
Yep.
and worse.
Yep.
And what ended up happening is one day when I was working with him, and I thought it was going to be okay, and his muscle spasms were, and I was working through it, and I was petting that area, he actually went to pull himself up really high and slam his body down on top of me. It's the one and only time I felt really afraid of
Wow.
him. And I thought, you know what? I need to put the halter away for a while. I need to work all the issues next to this, not dive right into the big issue. And it took him about a month and a half to stop having muscle spasms every time I reached towards his neck, which he had not had before I took the halter out.
Wow.
So we spent another 6 weeks unraveling that. And now we're at the point where I can put the halter on and off, and he's doing great, and there's no muscle spasms. But you really have to check in with yourself. Is this
Yep.
a false bravado where I think, oh, we can
Yep.
push through it? Or is this a real confident knowing of this discomfort is temporary? I'm really sure that on the other side of it, there's going to be a good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And with her, that is what happened. You know, I felt the muscles starting to release, and she was able to let me in a little bit there,
Yeah.
and have some release and things. But I know that it's something that I've really not timed well, or seen well at
Yep.
other times, right?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that, and I think that there's lots of listeners that will appreciate that as well. So thank you. Yeah.
One of the keys that I have found for myself is to notice the regularity of my breathing when I'm pushing through something.
Mm,
If I have a really easy time breathing in a regular rhythm, I'm probably going to be successful. If I find my breath is catching and I have little moments where I can't breathe in or I can't breathe
mm.
out, I probably should be working something next to the problem, not directly on the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. I feel that. You know, I was telling you before the call about my new mare, Raven,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a Canadian horse. She's such a beauty. And she's just super cool. Like she's just a super cool girl. But I've really been recognizing how shut down, um, she is, because she's one of these horses that's very obedient. Like she's just like, okay, like
Yeah.
I'll just do the thing that tell me to do. And we went to my friends for this Liberty lesson, and it was so humbling. It was so humbling because she literally like walked over the fence and put her head over the fence and just looked off at the horses, and that was it. And of course yeah, I was having a bit of a moment about that, and because
As you do.
yeah,
Yeah.
my instructor was having a good giggle over my slight tantrum, and it just made me recognize, okay, like we have to start at the beginning. We've got to start at the beginning. And yesterday I was working with her, and I did a little bit of Liberty, and then we we've been working on the cavusson. She's got arthritic issues, so we've been working with some academic art of riding just to strengthen her body.
Right.
And then I got on because I was like, oh, I should ride every week just to make sure. And she became this, like, it was like her walk became so stilted and just like it was like, what am I riding right, like, what am I on right now? Because 'Cause I'd gone right from riding Diva, who is just we have this beautiful connection,
Yeah.
under saddle to this, and I was like, what is happening under me? And
Yeah.
she didn't fight as such, but it was like everything was just this like, eh, like I'd gotten on like the Tin Man from,
Yep. You can
it
feel the freeze of
oh
self-protection in her.
my gosh.
Yeah.
And I literally I just got off. I was like, "Okay, foundation it is," like we need to go back to the beginning here
Yeah.
because I don't want to push this kind of, this freeze response into bigger
Yeah.
places where it's going to impact her body and her back and,
But
um
I think it's really a spectrum. And
yeah.
instead of labeling it good or bad, it's really important to label it this is getting better or getting
Yep.
worse.
Yep.
I get invited to ride friends' horses often, and it's fun to hop on a horse and just ride. But the more traditionally trained horses, I find there is always some level of self protection
Mhm.
in their body.
Yep.
And when I get on my own horses and I feel the generosity of
Mhm.
movements where they don't feel like they have to self protect, I
Yep.
feel like, oh, wow,
Mm.
why would I ride anything other than
Mhm.
this?
Mhm.
And maybe I need to just so I see the contrast and I really appreciate my own. But
Yes. Yes.
my own are not that educated because I spend so much time developing the minute details. But when I get on, the lack of width of skill of different things we can do is completely eclipsed by the depth of relationship and the
Mhm.
degree with which they feel they can just give of themselves, and there's no sense of self-protection in there.
Mm.
So
I love that. I love that. That is it's such a beautiful message too that, that is that's what we're looking for. That's the yeah, in my mind that's kind of like the holy grail of, why we're doing this thing in the big, from the first, right? Is
yeah,
that feeling of they're with us,
but
they're
we just have to remember it's not all or nothing.
yeah.
If every ride you can get on and they feel a little better, at the end of the ride than
Yep.
they did at the beginning, well, then, 10 years down the line, you've got something phenomenal. But it doesn't mean that 15 years down the line, it's not going to be more phenomenal.
Oh my gosh, I'm a
So,
testament to that. I'm
yeah.
17 years in and it's just like, "Oh, this is so good." With me and Diva, it's like
Yeah.
that it took that long,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
so
it's
you got to still value those early days where you go,
yeah.
oh,
Oh,
this
yeah.
feels a little rough, but I can see it getting better. That's worth something.
I love that. Such a good reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, I think it gives a lot of people hope, and like I love that phrase. It's like slow down now to go faster later. There's something like
Yeah.
that, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's okay to just slow it right down.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like I have to give myself permission to do that all the time. I feel
Mhm.
like my family of origin was, very much into sports and winning, and you either won or you lost. And, it was very competitive. And I still have a certain amount of shame when I go out in the pasture and I think, well, what did I really accomplish today? I
Mhm.
spent an hour. Did we win anything?
Oh my gosh, we had a very similar childhood.
But I just have to keep remembering that it's a different direction. There's dimensions to the relationship, and width is where you win lots of different things, and depth is where
Mhm.
you feel. You learn to enjoy each moment for what it's worth.
Mm.
So
Oh, man.
that's my own personal journey, and I can't quite believe that so many students are interested in taking it with me, but I am gratified every day that there is a section of the population that is interested in this. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I'd love to be a part of it.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for all these amazing wisdom bombs today. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful. And I would love to know, I know that you've got some things on, how do people get in touch? How can they engage with this work at this moment, this weird moment in time?
This is actually a really good moment in time for people to engage because freedom based training is very slow. And so the best way to learn it is where I can give you kind of a slow trickle of information. Um, I love teaching clinics. I love going around the world and talking to people face to face, but we just got a little teeny chunk of the work that way. The best way to learn freedom based training is actually through my online course, where I can give people a trickle of information a little bit at a time as they're ready for it.
Mm,
And, outside of that, I do tea time every Tuesday where I just take a topic
mhm.
and I talk about it for a little while. And my Patreon group, I post a video every week of what's inspirational for me right now and what I'm doing with my horses. So you can access all of those things via my website,
Mhm.
tamingwild.com. That's the easiest way to access all of those pieces. And I
Awesome.
write a blog every so often, not as often as I used to, but I do my best to keep some writing update for those people that like it that way too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elsa. And thanks for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Alexa.
It's very appreciated. And I know that I learned much in this last chunk of time. And I know my listeners will be, learning a lot as well. So I hope to have you back again sometime very soon.
Anytime. I love our conversations. I'm going to go home and take all of the stuff we just talked about and put it into practice because
Woohoo, me too. I can't wait. Totally. Well, thank you. And we will chat with you all very, very soon.